I bought a house without telling my parents, then found out they planned for my brother's whole family, so I cut them off. I still remember the rush of excitement when I signed those final papers. At 32, after 8 long years of saving every penny, I had finally done it. I bought my first house. A beautiful 3-bedroom with a spacious backyard in a quiet neighborhood. I decided to keep it a secret from my family, planning to surprise them with the news. Little did I know that this decision would completely change the relationship I had with my parents forever. Let me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button as I take you through one of the most difficult periods of my life. Growing up in my family was never easy. From as far back as I can remember, there was always a clear hierarchy. My older brother James was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was just Barry, the afterthought, the one who had to fight for any scrap of attention or approval. This dynamic only grew more pronounced when James married Natalie 7 years ago. They quickly had 2 kids, Logan, who is now 5, and Emma, who just turned 3. With each addition to his family, James seemed to climb higher on my parents' pedestal, while I remained firmly planted at the bottom. My parents, Michael and Susan Thompson, are not terrible people. They just never tried to hide their favoritism. When James needed help with his college tuition, they remortgaged the house. When I needed the same help 3 years later, I was told the family finances were too tight and I would need to figure it out myself. I worked 2 jobs throughout college and graduated with substantial student loans that took years to pay off. Despite all this, I still maintained a relationship with my family. Not close, but civil enough. I would visit for major holidays and occasional Sunday dinners, sitting through hours of my parents gushing over James' achievements and my niece and nephew's latest milestones. I built my own life away from their influence. I focused on my career as a software engineer, worked hard, and slowly climbed the corporate ladder. I lived frugally in a small apartment, drove the same car for 10 years, and put away as much money as I could each month. My dream was always to own my own home, a place that was truly mine. The day I decided to start actively house hunting was after yet another Sunday dinner where my mother spent 30 minutes showing everyone pictures of the vacation they had helped pay for James and his family to take to Florida. I excused myself early that night and drove home with a new determination. I was going to build something for myself without their help or input. The house hunting process was both exciting and exhausting. I spent weekends with my realtor Diane, visiting dozens of properties. Too small, bad neighborhood needed too much work out of my price range. For 3 months, nothing felt right. Then one Saturday morning, Diane called me with excitement in her voice. A new listing had just come on the market that morning, and she thought it might be perfect. We rushed over to see it before the open house scheduled for later that day. The moment I walked through the front door, I knew this was it. The house was not huge, but felt spacious with its open floor plan. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances, hardwood floors throughout, and the backyard was a decent size with a mature oak tree providing perfect shade. The neighborhood was safe and quiet with a park just 2 blocks away. Best of all, it was within my budget. I made an offer that same day, slightly above asking price to beat out any competition. 2 anxious days later, my offer was accepted. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork inspections and finalizing the mortgage. Through it all, I told no one in my family. I wanted to wait until everything was finalized before sharing my news. The day I got the keys was one of the happiest of my life. I stood alone in the empty living room of my house, keys in hand, and felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I had ever experienced. I decided to wait just 1 more week to tell my family. I wanted to move in some basic furniture first so I could invite them over for a small celebration. Then came the call that would change everything. It was my mother asking if I could come over that weekend for a family dinner because they had something important to discuss. I agreed immediately, thinking this would be the perfect opportunity to share my own news. There was something in her voice, though a nervous energy that left me feeling slightly uneasy. Still, I remained optimistic. I even bought a nice bottle of champagne to bring over, planning to announce my news after whatever discussion they had planned. The day before the dinner, I picked up small gifts for everyone. A bottle of my father's favorite Scotch, a scented candle for my mother, and toys for Logan and Emma. As I drove to my parents' house that Saturday evening, I had no idea I was heading straight into the eye of a storm that would tear my family apart. I pulled up to my childhood home right at 6 o'clock, exactly when my mother had asked me to arrive. The familiar two-story colonial looked the same as it always had, with its white siding and dark green shutters. The front garden that my mother had always meticulously maintained was in full bloom with spring flowers. James' BMW was already parked in the driveway, and I could see Logan and Emma playing in the front yard while Natalie watched from the porch. She gave me a quick wave that seemed forced. Something about her demeanor immediately put me on edge. Inside, the house smelled like my mother's famous pot roast, a dish she only made for special occasions. My father was in the living room, nursing a glass of scotch and watching golf on the television. He barely looked up when I entered, just nodded in acknowledgement. "Barry, you made it," my mother said, emerging from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She gave me a quick hug, but I could feel the tension in her shoulders. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes. James came downstairs, greeting me with our usual half-hug, half-shoulder bump. "Little brother," he said, his voice carrying that slight condescending tone it always had when he addressed me. "Good to see you made it." Throughout the dinner, I noticed strange glances being exchanged between my parents and James. Natalie kept bringing up the big discussion and then abruptly changing the subject when she caught my eye. The kids were the only ones acting normal, with Logan telling me excitedly about his t-ball league and Emma showing me her new doll. I tried several times to find an opening to share my news, but the conversation kept being steered in different directions. After dessert was served, my father cleared his throat loudly. "All right, now that we have all eaten, there is something important we need to discuss as a family," he announced. Everyone moved to the living room, with James and Natalie sitting close together on the sofa, my parents taking their usual armchairs, and me relegated to the uncomfortable wooden chair from the dining room. As you all know, my father began looking everywhere, but at me. "Susan and I have lived in this house for over 35 years. We raised you boys here, and we love this place. But we have been doing some thinking about the future." My mother jumped in, with James' family growing and space becoming an issue in their townhouse, especially with the new baby on the way. That was the first I had heard about another pregnancy, but I kept my expression neutral. "We have decided," my father continued, "that the most sensible thing to do is to sell this house. With the money from the sale, plus some of our retirement savings, we will buy a larger home where all of us can live together." I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. "All of us?" I asked. "Yes," my mother beamed. "James, Natalie, the kids, the new baby, your father and I, and you too. Of course, Barry, if you want. Though we assumed you would probably prefer to keep your apartment, we found this beautiful two-story house with a finished basement." James chimed in. "Mom and Dad would have the master suite on the main floor. We would take the second floor for our family, and there is even a small apartment set up in the basement that could be yours someday if you decided to join us. The point is," my father continued, "we will need to pool our resources for this to work. The house we are looking at is quite expensive, but it would solve so many problems." Natalie nodded enthusiastically. "It would be so helpful to have your parents around to help with the kids, and Logan and Emma would love having their grandparents and uncle around all the time." That was when it hit me. They were not just informing me of their plans. They were expecting me to contribute financially to this arrangement, an arrangement that clearly centered around James and his family. "How much are you expecting me to contribute?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. My parents exchanged glances. Well, my mother finally said, "We thought perhaps 20% of the purchase price would be fair from you. James and Natalie will be contributing 30%, and we will cover the rest." I did some quick mental math. Based on housing prices in the area they were describing, they were asking me for close to $100,000 for a house I would not even be living in. And this is the first I am hearing about this, because I prompted. My father looked genuinely confused. "You have never shown much interest in family matters before, Barry. We did not think you would want to be involved in all the planning stages." Besides, James added with a smirk, "It is not like you have a family of your own to worry about housing. You have always been focused on your career." Natalie nodded. "You probably have plenty saved up without any real expenses. No kids to feed, no family to support." Each word felt like a knife twisting in my gut. All those years of working multiple jobs, living frugally, sacrificing social outings and vacations to save for my own home, and they assumed I had money to spare because I did not have the same responsibilities as James. The anger I had suppressed for years began to bubble to the surface. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You are selling the family home to buy a bigger house, primarily for James and his family to live in, and you expect me to contribute a substantial amount of money toward this purchase, even though I would not be living there, and you never once thought to include me in this decision-making process." My mother looked taken aback by my tone. "Barry, this is about family. We are just trying to do what is best for everyone." Everyone, I laughed bitterly. Or just James? The room went silent. I could feel 5 pairs of eyes locked on me, shock evident on every face. James was the first to recover his expression, morphing from surprise to indignation. "What is that supposed to mean?" he demanded, sitting forward on the couch. "This arrangement benefits the entire family." I shook my head, years of pent-up frustration, finally finding an outlet. "No, James. This, like everything else in this family, is designed to benefit you and your needs. The rest of us are just expected to fall in line and support the golden child." My father's face flushed red. "That is enough, Barry. Your brother has responsibilities that you simply do not understand. He has children to consider, and that somehow makes his needs more important than mine." I shot back. "It gives him the right to expect me to hand over my savings for a house I will not even live in." My mother reached out a placating hand. "Barry, dear, you just thought I would go along with it because I always have." I interrupted. "Well, here is something you should have thought to ask me about before making all these plans. I bought a house. My own house. Last week." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyes widened in disbelief. James stared at me as though I had just announced I was from another planet. "You." What my mother finally managed. "I bought a house," I repeated, a strange sense of calm washing over me now that my secret was out. "A 3-bedroom in Oakwood Heights. I got the keys last week and have been moving in gradually." "You bought a house without telling any of us." My father's voice was low and dangerous. "Yes, just like you planned to sell our family home without consulting me." Natalie sniffed disapprovingly. "Well, that is just typical Barry, is it not? Always thinking only of himself." Something in me snapped. "Only thinking of myself? Are you serious right now?" I stood up, unable to remain seated any longer. "Let me remind you all of a few things. When James needed braces, he got them immediately. When I needed them, I was told to wait until there was enough money saved up. That wait stretched to 2 years. When James wrecked his first car, you bought him a new one within a month. When my car broke down in college, I had to take the bus for an entire semester because there was no money to help. I turned to face my parents directly. When James got married, you paid for the entire wedding. You gave him and Natalie the down payment for their townhouse as a wedding gift. Meanwhile, I put myself through college. I paid for my own apartment, my own car, everything. and the few times I did ask for help, I was made to feel like a burden. My mother's eyes welled with tears. That is not true, Barry. We have always loved you just as much as James. Love is not just a feeling, Mom. It is action, and your actions have always shown that James is the priority. My father stood now too, his height still imposing, even in his mid-60s. We did the best we could with what we had. James needed more help. He struggled more. Did he? Or did you just never give me the chance to struggle because you expected me to handle everything on my own from day one? I turned to James. Do you remember my college graduation? You all showed up an hour late because Logan had a cold. Not even a fever, just a runny nose. You missed me getting my diploma. Then you left early because Emma was fussy. Kids have to come first, James defended. Yes, they do. But you know what should also matter? Being there for significant moments in your other son's life. My father's voice rose. You are being incredibly selfish right now. Family is about sacrifice. Sacrifice. I laughed without humor. What exactly have you sacrificed for me, Dad? What has James ever sacrificed for me? It has always been me expected to understand, to give in, to make allowances. Natalie, never one to stay quiet, jumped in. Well, if you already bought a house, maybe you should sell it and contribute that money to the family home. It would be the right thing to do. I stared at her in disbelief. Sell the house I just bought, the one I saved 8 years for. To contribute to your living arrangements? James nodded, as if this made perfect sense. You could live in the basement apartment of the new place. It has its own entrance and everything. Are you listening to yourselves? I asked, genuinely astonished. You want me to sell my dream home that I worked for years to afford to live in your basement and help pay for your mortgage? My mother, trying to smooth things over, as always, said softly, We just want the family to be together, Barry. No, I said, the clarity of the moment striking me with force. You want what is convenient for James and his family. You want my money without having to acknowledge my needs or desires. You want me to keep playing the role I have always played, the supportive younger brother who expects nothing and gives everything. I took a deep breath, suddenly seeing my family, with clear eyes for perhaps the first time in my life. I am done, I said quietly. I am done being the afterthought. I am done being expected to sacrifice while James takes. I am done with this conditional love that only flows when I am doing what benefits everyone else. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I have a beautiful new home that I paid for myself. I have a life I have built without your help or input. I do not need to live in anyone's basement, and I certainly do not need to contribute to a family fund that only ever seems to benefit one part of this family. Barry, do not walk out that door, my father warned. If you leave now, you will regret it. I looked at him sadly. The only thing I regret is not doing this years ago. With that, I walked out, the sound of my mother calling my name fading as I got into my car and drove away from my childhood home for what I suspected might be the last time. The drive back to my new house that night was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I barely registered the familiar streets passing by. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the sight of my house, MY House, brought both a rush of pride and a wave of grief. Inside, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the sparse furniture I had managed to acquire, I collapsed onto my couch. The reality of what had just happened hit me all at once. I had effectively cut ties with my entire family. The hurt and anger I felt were overwhelming, but underneath it all was something else, something that surprised me relief. Those first few weeks were the hardest. My phone constantly lit up with texts and calls from my parents, and occasionally James. The messages ranged from angry accusations about my selfishness to tearful pleas to reconsider. Each one felt like reopening a wound, so eventually I stopped reading them altogether. I threw myself into making my house a home. I painted each room, installed new light fixtures, and slowly filled the empty spaces with furniture that reflected my taste. There was something therapeutic about creating a space that was entirely mine, designed for my comfort and happiness rather than to please anyone else. The loneliness was difficult to bear at times. Despite the complicated relationship I had with my family, they had still been a constant presence in my life. There were moments, especially late at night, when I questioned my decision. Had I overreacted? Was I being too harsh? But then I would remember the casual way they had dismissed my feelings, the assumption that I would sacrifice my dreams for James' needs yet again, and my resolve would strengthen. About a month after the confrontation, I met my neighbors Alan and Sophia Martinez, a young couple who had moved in next door around the same time I did. They invited me over for a barbecue, and their easy warmth and genuine interest in getting to know me was like a balm to my wounded spirit. Soon, we fell into a comfortable routine of shared meals and weekend home improvement projects. It was Sophia who first suggested I might benefit from talking to someone professional about my family situation. "What you are describing, Barry, sounds like a lifetime of emotional neglect," she said gently one evening, as we sat on my newly built deck. "That leaves scars, even if you cannot see them." With her encouragement, I started seeing Dr. Walker, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Our weekly sessions became anchors in my new life. Dr. Walker helped me understand the patterns that had defined my family relationships and, more importantly, that I deserved better. Healthy love is not conditional, she would remind me, and setting boundaries is not the same as abandoning family. It is about protecting yourself from patterns that cause harm. As summer turned to fall, I discovered new interests that I had never had time for before. I planted a vegetable garden in my backyard, learning through trial and error. I took cooking classes at the community center and found I had a knack for creating elaborate pasta dishes. I joined a local hiking group and spent Sundays exploring trails in the surrounding state parks. My house gradually became a home. The living room shelves filled with books I actually had time to read. The kitchen drawers contained utensils for recipes I was excited to try. The spare bedroom became a home office where I could work remotely on days when I did not feel like going into the office. 6 months after the confrontation, I hosted my first dinner party. Alan and Sophia came along with a few colleagues from work and members of my hiking group. As I looked around my dining room table at these people who genuinely enjoyed my company and respected my boundaries, I realized I had created something precious, a chosen family. It was at a farmer's market in early spring that I met Elise. I was examining heirloom tomato plants, debating which varieties to add to my garden, when she offered some expert advice. Elise was a landscape architect with a passion for edible gardens and a smile that made my heart race. We exchanged numbers under the pretense of her giving me gardening tips, but we both knew there was more to it. Our first date stretched from coffee to dinner to a moonlit walk along the river. Conversation flowed effortlessly, and for the first time in my life, I found myself completely comfortable sharing the complicated story of my family with someone new. Elise listened without judgment, sharing her own experiences with difficult family dynamics. "Family is not just about blood," she told me, her hand warm in mine. "It is about who shows up for you, who sees you for who you really are." As our relationship deepened, Elise helped me see parts of my house with fresh eyes. Together, we repainted the kitchen, built a window seat in the living room, and transformed the backyard into a stunning garden retreat. Each change made the space more ours, a physical manifestation of this new chapter in my life. Almost exactly 1 year after I had walked out of my parents' house, there was a knock at my door on a Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find both my parents standing on my porch, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "Barry," my mother said, her voice small, "can we talk?" I hesitated, then stepped aside to let them in. They stood awkwardly in my entryway, taking in the home I had created without them. "It is a lovely house," my father offered stiffly. I led them to the living room, noticing how they sat together on the edge of the sofa, uncomfortable in this space that was wholly mine. "Why are you here?" I asked directly. My mother twisted her hands in her lap. "Things have not gone as planned, Barry. James lost his job 3 months ago. The new house. We cannot afford the mortgage payments anymore. We had to put it up for short sale," my father added, not quite meeting my eyes. "We will be taking a significant financial loss." I waited, already sensing where this conversation was headed. "We thought perhaps," my mother continued hesitantly, "with your good job and this lovely home, maybe you could help us out, just until we get back on our feet." In that moment, I felt no anger, no satisfaction at their predicament, just a profound sadness that even now they saw me primarily as a resource to solve their problems. "I am sorry about your situation," I said calmly, "but I cannot offer financial help." My father's face darkened. "After everything we have done for you, Dad," I interrupted gently. "That is exactly the problem. You believe you have done so much for me, but from where I sit, I have been expected to fend for myself my whole life while watching you give everything to James. And that was painful, but it also made me the person I am today. It made me independent and resourceful, and strong enough to build this life for myself." My mother began to cry softly. "We love you, Barry. We always have. I believe you love me," I acknowledged. "But you never respected me or saw me as equal to James. And I cannot keep participating in a relationship where that is the case." They stayed for another hour. We talked more openly than we ever had before. I explained how their treatment had affected me throughout my life, and for perhaps the first time they seemed to actually listen. There were no dramatic apologies or promises to change overnight, but there was at least an acknowledgement that things had been unbalanced. As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door. "Are you happy, son?" he asked a question I could not remember him ever asking before. I thought about my home, my garden, my friends, about Elise, who would be coming over later that evening, about the life I had created for myself. "Yes," I said honestly. "I am." That conversation did not magically heal decades of hurt, but it was a beginning. I maintained my boundaries in the months that followed, declining invitations to family gatherings that I knew would fall back into old patterns, but accepting occasional lunch with just my mother or father when they reached out, individually. Today, I stand in my backyard, watching Elise plant bulbs that will bloom next spring. The engagement ring in my pocket waits for the perfect moment later this evening. My house has become our house, filled with love and respect and the healthy boundaries I never experienced growing up. I learned that sometimes the family we choose is more nurturing than the one we are born into. I learned that standing up for yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. And I learned that creating a home is not just about buying property, but about building a space where you are truly seen and valued. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to choose yourself sometimes. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to create the life you deserve, whatever that looks like for you.